Hey, Anthony here with Advanced Vector, and today I'm bringing you that follow-up on my Alienware M15 R3. I got a lot of feedback. This has actually been the biggest video that I've ever done. I'm really excited about it. Apparently, Dell didn't send out any of these models to some of the bigger reviewers, and I just happened to get mine first and post some videos. So you guys had some great questions. I think the number one question that everyone has really been asking about is the thermals. And if that's all you hear about, let's just go ahead and get that out of the way. I'll go over some like solid numbers and stuff in a minute now. But realistically, the thing, so I do have that i9 processor. That's the i9 10980HK. And right off the bat, as soon as you flip the switch on that thing in any way whatsoever, immediately you jump up to 100 degrees Celsius and it starts throttling itself. So from that perspective, it's a little underwhelming. You've kind of got to underclock it quite a bit to get it to where you're not just constantly bumping up against that 100-degree mark. Now, that being said, I have not repasted this at all yet. That is something that I am going to do. I plan on doing. I'm going to try some of that cryo not thermal paste. I've never used it before, but apparently it's the best stuff out there now. On my old Alienware, I actually used some of that graphite thermal pad, and that worked out okay, but it was just an i7 with a 1070. This thing definitely generates a lot more heat. So that's kind of the quick down and dirty. I do have a few charts that I'll throw up on the screen here. And this is, this isn't something that I do all the time, guys, so kind of bear with me. If there are some specific tests or results or something like that you want, definitely leave a comment. Let me know. And when I do my motherboard swap, so I got a guy coming out to swap me out. I ended up actually, my Alienware was supposed to have the 2080 Max Q, and it only shipped with the 2070 in it. So when the Dell technician is going to come out and just swap my motherboard so I don't have to send the machine back. And when he does that, I'm going to go ahead and have him put on that cryo not thermal paste that I have ordered. So we'll give that a go. And so it'll be a couple different things, but I have done testing isolated where I'm just stressing the CPU. So the addition of, or the change of the GPU shouldn't make a big difference. And essentially it's just way too much horsepower for the thermal dissipation that we have in such a small case. I would like to think and justify that in some situation it might be better just to have more threads. And I suppose, I'm hoping maybe in a streaming situation where I'm trying to play a game and stream at the same time, having those 2 additional cores and 4 more threads versus an i7 that just has 6 might be better. I really wouldn't know that unless I did some practical testing though. So, it is what it is. I'm on the fence. I'm going to have to wait and see what happens after I repaste it, after I get that 2080 and see what happens. I may send this thing back and get the exact same specs, but just with the i7, something that's going to be a little bit better on the thermals. We'll see. I mean, it's like a $400 upgrade to go from the i7 to the i9. And if you can't really utilize it at all, I found that I had to, neuter it pretty bad. Set it down to about 4 gigahertz. If I underclock it to about 4 gigs, then it starts to settle in like the mid 8 to high 80s. But anyways, so that kind of addresses the overheating issue. So back to these charts. So I do have a couple of charts, and I'll throw them up on the screen now. And this top one that I have, I've done, it's just a 3D Mark stress test, and it is the Time Spy Extreme stress test, which lasts for 20 minutes. And it just kind of iterates through one of their tests over and over and over and over again. But what I think it does is it is not something that is just going full bore max out. I think what it does is it kind of replicates that actual gameplay type of a situation. So in a situation like that, what I did is I did it under 2 different fan profiles. So I did it under the balanced fan profile as well as the full fans, just fans on full blast. And when the fans are on full blast, it's pretty loud. Even with my Alienware headphones, which are pretty cushiony. I was able to hear that very clearly, even over watching some YouTube videos and stuff while I was waiting for that stress test to finish. Now, on the balanced fan profile, when I ran that, I had my headphones on and I really couldn't notice it. So I think if you were gaming with that at that situation, you'd be fine. So looking at these two charts, we can see, the frames per second and stuff like that. It looks pretty similar. In fact, the frequency for our CPU is really close. It's sitting right in there, about 4.5, which is not bad, really. But the temperatures that we're looking at here for both the CPU and the GPU, and they're both sitting right around 60. That the CPU does spike up into the 80s, like when it would hit that loop sometimes, where it kind of resets that loop. You can see some spikes along there. But overall, I want to say that you get a little bit, these graphs might be just a little bit cooler from the balanced fans to full fans, but really not getting that much, sitting right in the mid 60s for the most part. You may gain a few degrees, so the extra noise is definitely not even worth it to me. So that's that. There's a few other questions that just some people had in the comments that are kind of, I won't say random, but just kind of things. So someone asked about the touchpad. I use a mouse 99% of the time. Even when I'm on the road or whatever, I have a mouse that I carry with me. That being said, I did utilize this touchpad quite a bit the other day just to try to get a feel for it. And, someone had mentioned that previous models had an issue with the touchpad. So I didn't have an issue with this touchpad. Like, there was no error. It wasn't glitching. It's responsive. It works. It functions as I would imagine it's intended to. But what I will say about it is it's a lot of work. And what I mean by that is it takes a lot of pressure to actually click. There's a very loud, resounding click. In fact, maybe you guys will be able to hear this. It's a lot of travel. It's actually very similar to kind of the Macs, but it's like they didn't dial in the pressure right. So you really gotta it takes some pressure to click and push, and it feels awkward, really is what it does. Now, you can do kind of just a light tap, and that acts as a single click or a double click as well. So that's kind of nice, that they added that, but to be honest, I think I would have rather had one or the other, not both. Now you get yourself in a situation where you want to do a hard click, but you don't push hard enough or whatnot, and it's a little bit awkward. So that is kind of a negative for me. Again, not that big of a deal. I think that you would get used to it. The trackpad itself is very accurate. It feels nice. It's a nice smooth finish. I actually like this a lot better even than the older Alienware trackpad that used to light up and stuff. So anyways, those are my thoughts on the trackpad. I saw another question in the comments that talked about solid states and SSDs and upgrading and stuff like that. And so I'll kind of go over that again. I did touch on it in the last video a little bit, but basically this machine has a spot for 2 of your full-size NVMEs, which are the 80 centimeter, I believe. And then it has a spot for like a super weird, I don't know if it's proprietary or not. I've never been able to find another NVMe drive that's that size, but it has a spot for a smaller NVMe drive, which I haven't done any drive tests or anything, guys. I apologize. Try to get around to it. I know you guys want more information for speeds and stuff, but from what I could see and what I read and in the review yesterday, we saw it was keyed like normal NVMEs. It seems, it's hard for a human to just interact with the computer and know the different speeds. But I will do some drive speed tests, and I'll try to include those in the next round of testing that I do when I get that motherboard swapped out. Anyway, so that being said, you've got the 3 NVMe slots. You've got that smaller one, and then the 2 normal kind of full-sized slots. And that's it. There is, as far as I know, and I didn't see any connectors on the motherboard, and I didn't see anything in the literature online. So there is no option. There's no spot whatsoever for a 2.5-inch solid state drive. Everything is NVMe now. Another thing that someone mentioned is kind of white versus black on the finish of these. So what I would say is this: I definitely prefer kind of the darker look. I feel like it's more professional and stuff like that. However, I can understand how aesthetically, the white would look good. Someone had mentioned that on some of the older models, the white, after years of use, just kind of gets a brown tinge to it, especially on the palm rest, where you're just kind of rubbing and grinding that dirt into it all the time. I have never owned a white laptop, but I could totally see how that would happen knowing the finish of kind of the older Alienwares. Now, I do not think that would be as big, if an issue at all, with these ones. And the reason I say that, and unless they do their coating completely different, like I mentioned yesterday, the palm rest of this thing is, it's metal. It's got some kind of aluminum housing. So, you've seen Macs and stuff like that. And after years, they, are maybe starting to show a little bit of wear, but nothing like the grunge and stuff. And so this, if the white ones have that same kind of finish, I don't think you'd have any issues. What I would say is, if you want a white one, go for it. If it doesn't feel like it's kind of got that hard coating, that hard finish on the palm rest, then send it back if you're worried about that. But I'm quite certain that it is probably... I don't know, this isn't the right term because I know it's not enameled, but that's what I'll say for this. I'm quite certain that they probably used the same kind of coating or enameling on this thing. And so I don't think you'd have any issues with that. All right, let's see here. So I think those are most of the big questions. I did have someone else that wanted to see kind of the side-by-side from my old Alienware 15 R4. So that's not an M15. It's just the normal 15s that were kind of the predecessor to the M15s. And so we'll go ahead and do that now. In fact, let's switch over and we'll look at the bench, and then we'll do some of those comparisons. Okay. All right. So I'm not really going to do the top-down camera. Again, guys, I apologize. It's just, it's a lot easier, frankly, to edit my videos if I only have one camera to worry about and maybe a computer screen and a few pictures. So I do have both of the laptops here, and I'll set them one on top of the other, and we'll kind of just do that comparison there. Again, you can kind of see, especially from the back, it's a lot thinner. But there's the side for the I/O. We'll show the kind of that front angle as well, and I think that actually it shows well kind of the difference there. But again, really, I would say 10-15% thinner, at most. But so there's kind of your 360 difference in thinness. And then, of course, when I have kind of the top lined up, just to kind of show you, so you've got a good 1.5 inches, maybe even 2 inches smaller front to back. And if we line this up on the left side, again, kind of another solid 2 inches left to right. So significantly smaller. And I'll just kind of, now that I've had a chance to kind of heft them both again, honestly, weight wise, they're not as far off as I initially, I could probably just look at the specs of both of these, but as I'm just kind of lifting them, this one is definitely lighter, but it's not like, hell, I guess it might be a pound or two lighter, which is quite a bit when you're talking about laptops. So, so there's that. I don't think there was any other questions that were specifically, involved anything physically with the computer. Other than there was this trackpad, and some people had some questions about the sizes. So that's kind of that with the physical stuff. If you have more comments, definitely leave them below. I plan on doing another iteration of these same kind of things, hopefully I get a little better every time. I appreciate you guys bearing with me. This is not the kind of video that I normally do. I'm very technically inclined, but kudos to the guys who review devices and computers and stuff like this all the time that have figured out how to do all the benchmarking. And, I messed around with hardware info a little bit earlier, tried to export some stuff and make some fancy graphs, but I just I spent about 2 hours on it and I wasn't able to figure it out. So I'm like, I'm just sticking with 3D Mark built in for now, and I'll have to build my toolbox on that as we go. Anyway, so the last thing that I wanted to kind of cover here, and I'll throw this next picture up on the screen as well. Let me just pull it up on my current screen. Is I did do the 3D Mark Firestrike. Now I know TimeSpy is kind of the new one. And unfortunately I just, you kind of keep chasing that higher score, and I didn't get a time strike in where I had my settings tweaked just right. But the most I was able to get out of this thing on Firestrike, and the reason I kind of stick with Firestrike is it kind of helps me keep things in perspective. Way back in 2015, when I kind of first got into this benchmarking and stuff like that, is Firestrike was the big one. And so I will do a time spy on this one eventually. But anyways, I'm going to throw those results up on the screen. So kind of on the left side of this picture here, you see stock, completely stock, not overclocked, on balanced power. Like if you were to pull this thing out of the box and run Firestrike through it, this is the result that you would get. And so you can see we got a pretty reasonable result. I think 19,000 is pretty good. My Alienware M15 or my Alienware 15 R4 was getting about 1750. Now that's like the most I could get out of it after I was overclocking, tweaking, all of that other stuff. And I don't get too crazy in this stuff, but I spent a good 4 or 5 hours just, trying different things, iterating, running Firestrike 30, 40, 50 times. And so I did the same kind of thing with that old Alienware, and I was able to get about 17 something. In fact, I can see, let me see if I can see it here. Okay, so I got 17,058 on my old laptop that was just with the 1070. So if you have one of those already and you're looking to upgrade your, if you're looking at that kind of end result to kind of beginning entry level stuff, you're not gaining a whole lot. Now, that being said, as we can tell by this picture here, after tweaking, running, doing everything that I could do, I managed to bump this up to 21,872 on Firestrike, which I think is pretty respectable. Now, that being said, I don't think that this is something that I would actually game on. I think a more realistic score for something that would be like a daily driver, kind of a gaming thing, if I'm trying to squeeze a little bit more performance out or some extra frames, would probably sit closer to that 21,000. I mean, it was just barely stable when I pulled this out, this 21,872. I was really hoping I could get 22, but it just couldn't happen for me today. After 4.5 hours of doing Firestrike over and over and over again, I had enough. So what does that get you? As we can see here, pretty much across the board, you're going to get a 10 to 20% increase by overclocking this. And I'm going to say 10 to 15. If you dial it back just a little bit, you don't lose that much on your score. But I think you'll just get a lot more stability. The other thing I want to note is we talk about thermals and overheating, and the issues that I had were purely related to the CPU. When I would overclock or benchmark or anything, the GPU, I did some Furmark and other things like that. I apologize, I don't have a fancy graph for that. But my results were closer to 75 degrees. I think was about the max, maybe the high 70, 75. I don't think I even hit 80 when I was stressing it, loading it. I ran it under load for about 20 minutes with the GPU only. And really it was in that 75 to 80 mark, degrees Celsius. So I think that's pretty good. And what that tells me is this has enough cooling for that GPU. It's just the CPU that's lacking. And maybe, and I'm kind of hopeful of this, maybe I just got a bad thermal paste and I need to kind of repaste that. So maybe when I repaste it, I won't have any more problems with the i9, or at least it'll come down to something that's a little bit more reasonable. Even if when I'm going, full bore, if I could get that i9 down to 85, 90 degrees, it's not optimal, but it just sucks when you hit that thermal limit and you start throttling and then you lose a lot of performance and other stuff like that. All right, guys. Well, I think that's going to go ahead and wrap this one up. I hope I answered all your questions. If I didn't, please leave a comment below. I'm really going to try to answer everyone's questions. I know that people are just dying for information about this. So if you haven't already, give me that thumbs up button. It really helps to show support for the channel. Keeps me motivated to do this stuff. And go ahead and subscribe. I have some pretty good other content as well in regards to technology and reviews and that kind of stuff. In the meantime, guys, we're going to call it an end to this one. So keep shopping and stay happy.